Part blizzard, stranger, and the yellowed paper. The wind howled like a wounded beast through the San Juan mountains, driving snow sideways against the weathered logs of Temperance Blackwood's cabin. She pressed dried yarrow leaves between her palms, the bitter scent filling her nostrils as she worked by candlelight. Outside, the Colorado winter of 1878 raged with particular vengeance, as if the mountain itself had taken offense at her presence. "Stubborn as a mule in mud," she muttered, echoing what the townsfolk down in Prospect Hollow said about her. A black woman, 40 years old and still unmarried. Living alone up the mountain with more book learning than the town doctor, it was enough to set tongues wagging from here to Denver. The mortar and pestle ground rhythmically as she prepared another batch of willow bark tincture. Mrs. Patterson would need it come morning for her husband's mining cough, assuming the storm passed and anyone could make it up the trail. Temperance had long since learned to prepare for the worst and hope for merely bad. A sudden thud against her door made her freeze. Not the wind too solid, too deliberate. Another thud, weaker this time. She reached for the shotgun propped beside the fireplace. Her movements practiced and calm. Living alone meant living ready. "Who's there?" she called, voice carrying the authority of someone who'd faced down worse than weather. "Please," the voice came muffled through wood and wind. "Please, ma'am, I'm freezing." Temperance peered through the frost-glazed window. A large figure slumped against her door, one hand still raised to knock. Snow had already begun to drift against his legs. She cracked the door, shotgun ready. The man who tumbled inside was tall, Lord. Was he tall with shoulders broad enough to fill her doorframe? Ice crystals clung to his dark beard, and his lips had turned an alarming shade of blue. He clutched a leather satchel to his chest like it held his very soul. "Thank you," he gasped, teeth chattering so hard she feared they'd crack. "Thank you, ma'am." "Don't thank me yet," Temperance said, but she was already moving, muscle memory taking over. "Get those wet clothes off before you lose fingers to frostbite. There's a blanket on that chair." The stranger's hands shook too badly to work the buttons. Temperance set down her gun and helped, her healer's practicality overriding any foolish notions of propriety. His fingers were white at the tips, dangerous but not yet lost. "What's your name?" she asked, rubbing his hands between hers to restore circulation. "Ezekiel," he managed through chattering teeth. "Ezekiel Stoltzfus." The name marked him as Pennsylvania Dutch, likely Amish or once was. What brought such a man to Colorado's mining country in the dead of winter? "Well, Mr. Stoltzfus, you're lucky you found my door. Another hour in that storm and you'd be explaining yourself to St. Peter instead of me." She wrapped him in 2 blankets and guided him to the chair nearest the fire. His satchel never left his grip. "I'm looking for Miss Temperance Blackwood," he said once the shivering subsided enough for clear speech. "The herb woman. They said in town she lived up this way." "They said right." She poured hot water from the kettle into a cup, added dried peppermint and a precious spoonful of honey. "Though I wonder what business brings a man up a mountain in a blizzard." Ezekiel accepted the tea gratefully, wrapping his large hands around the cup. In the firelight, she could see his face properly weathered but not old, maybe 35. With the kind of careful eyes that spoke of hard-learned lessons. "I carry a message," he said, "from Mr. Josiah Whitmore." Temperance's hands stilled. Old Josiah had owned the largest horse ranch in the valley until consumption took him last month. She'd tended him in his final days when his own family couldn't bear the sight of his suffering. "Josiah's dead and buried. What message could he have?" Ezekiel reached into his satchel with careful movements, producing an oilcloth packet. "His will, ma'am, the real one. He gave it to me 2 days before he passed, made me swear to deliver it personal-like. Said the lawyers in town couldn't be trusted with it." Temperance took the packet, her dark fingers steady despite the sudden racing of her heart. The papers inside bore Josiah's shaky signature and the witness marks of 2 ranch hands she recognized. As she read, The wind seemed to quiet, as if the mountain itself held its breath. "This can't be right," she whispered. Every word legal and true. Ezekiel said, "I watched him write it. Sound of mind. He was whatever his family might claim. According to the will, Josiah had left her the water rights to Angel Well, the sweetest, most reliable spring in the territory, along with 200 acres of prime valley land. The very land that controlled the only pass down to Prospect Hollow. But there was a condition. Within 6 months of his death," she read aloud, "the beneficiary must establish a free school for the children of Prospect Hollow and surrounding areas, as well as a medical dispensary for those who cannot afford the town doctor's fees. Should these conditions not be met, all rights and lands shall revert to the Meridian Railroad Company." The Meridian Railroad Company? Of course. They'd been buying up land all through the valley, forcing out small farmers with promises of progress and threats of progress's price. Their agent, a smooth-talking snake named Silas Weatherford, had tried 3 times to buy out Josiah. The old man had sent him packing each time. "Why?" Temperance asked. "Why leave this to me?" Ezekiel shifted in his chair, steam still rising from his tea. "He said you were the only one who treated him like a man dying, not a wallet walking. Said you had healing in your hands and learning in your head, and both were needed here." He paused. He also said Meridian would bleed this valley dry if they got that water. Temperance set down the papers. Mind racing. Angel Well watered half the valley. Without it, the small farms would wither, the miners' families would suffer, and Meridian could buy the whole territory for pennies on the dollar. "Mr. Stoltzfus," she said slowly, "why did Josiah trust you with this?" Something flickered across his face, guilt, perhaps, or old pain. "I used to work for the railroad. Security, they called it. I know their ways." He met her eyes directly. "I know what they do to people who stand in their path. And yet you're here. A man can change his path. Miss Blackwood can seek a better way." His large hands twisted in the blanket. "I've seen enough taking. Maybe it's time I helped with some giving." Outside, the storm raged on. But inside the cabin, a different kind of tempest was brewing. Temperance looked at the papers again. A school, a dispensary. 6 months to build what the town had needed for 20 years. "They'll fight this," she said. "Tooth and nail," Ezekiel agreed. "Silas Weatherford's had the sheriff in his pocket since last summer." "Sheriff Dugan's a small problem. Meridian's got bigger guns than him." Temperance stood, pacing the small cabin. Her medicine shelf caught her eye rows of carefully labeled jars, tinctures and salves that had saved more lives than she could count. But this was bigger than any fever or broken bone. "That land includes the old barn," she said, thinking aloud. "Big enough for a schoolroom, and the Johnson cabin's been empty since they moved to California, could work for a dispensary." "You're considering it, then?" She turned to face him, this stranger who'd appeared from the storm like something out of a fairy tale, bearing gifts that could change everything or destroy it all. "Mr. Stoltzfus, do you know what it's like to be the only black woman in 50 miles, to have people cross the street rather than greet you, then come knocking at midnight when their children burn with fever?" "No, ma'am, I don't." "They tolerate me because they need me. But a school teaching their children, and a dispensary that might show up their precious Dr. McKinnon." She shook her head. "They'll make it impossible." "Or maybe," Ezekiel said quietly, "they need those things more than they know. Maybe impossible is just another word for necessary." The wind gusted, sending snow hissing down the chimney. The fire flickered but didn't die. Temperance picked up the will again. In Josiah's shaky hand, below the formal language, he'd added a personal note. "Trust the mountain girl who wasn't afraid to hold an old man's hand. The water belongs to someone who understands thirst." "All right," she said. "All right. Mr. Stoltzfus, you can sleep in the loft tonight. There's hay and spare blankets. Come morning, if this storm breaks, we'll go to town and file these papers proper." And if Meridian's already got wind of it? Temperance smiled, and it wasn't a comfortable expression. Then they'll learn what this mountain woman does when someone tries to dam up what flows free. Ezekiel stood, still wrapped in blankets, and extended one large hand. Partners, then. She looked at his hand calloused from work, steady despite the cold, and shook it firmly. For now, we'll see what morning brings. As she banked the fire and prepared for sleep, Temperance couldn't shake the feeling that the storm had brought more than snow to her door. Change was coming to Prospect Hollow, whether the town was ready or not. And somewhere in the valley below, she knew, Silas Weatherford was planning too. The wind howled on, but inside the cabin, two unlikely allies settled in for the night, while ancient papers dried by the dying fire, holding promises that would either save the valley or see them both buried beneath its unforgiving soil. Part 2. The Waterway and Underground Currents. The storm broke 3 days later, leaving the world wrapped in pristine white that hurt to look at. Temperance stood at her window, watching Ezekiel split firewood with methodical precision. He'd proven useful these past days, fixing her roof where snow had found entry, organizing her woodpile, all while maintaining a respectful distance that spoke of good raising. Like watching a grandfather clock, she muttered, noting his regular rhythm. Chop, split, stack, chop, split, stack. The peace shattered with the jingle of harness bells. 3 riders approached through the snow, their horses laboring up the trail. Temperance recognized them before they dismounted Harold Finch the banker, Theodore Bramwell, who owned the general store, and Augustus Gus Hartley, who ran the largest boarding house in Prospect Hollow. "Gentlemen," she greeted from her doorway, not inviting them in. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Harold dismounted first, his thin face attempting what he probably thought was a winning smile. "Miss Blackwood, we heard the most extraordinary news in town, about Josiah's will." "News travels fast when the snow's slow," Temperance observed. Theodore cleared his throat. "We've come to offer our congratulations and our assistance." "Have you now?" "A woman alone, managing such valuable property." Gus let the words hang like icicles. "It's a considerable burden. We thought perhaps a partnership." "Or marriage." Harold interjected, smoothing his thinning hair. "A woman of your mature years might appreciate the security." Ezekiel's axe stopped mid-swing. He stood still as a statue, but Temperance could feel his attention sharp as a blade. "Gentlemen," Temperance said, her voice sweet as sorghum and twice as thick. "I appreciate your concern for my welfare. Truly touching how quickly you rode up here in such weather just to offer help." The 3 men preened slightly, missing her tone entirely. "However," she continued, "I've managed my own affairs for 20 years without requiring a man's name on my papers. I don't reckon I'll start now." Theodore's face flushed. "Miss Blackwood, you don't understand the complexities of water rights, of land management, of dealing with railroad men who'd sell their mothers for track-laying rights." She stepped onto her porch, arms crossed. "Which complexity did you think was beyond my comprehension?" Harold tried a different approach. "The conditions of the will require significant development. A school, a dispensary. These things need funding, connections. They need water," Temperance cut in, "which I have. They need land, which I have. As for the rest, well, that's my concern, not yours." The 3 men exchanged glances. Gus stepped forward, abandoning pretense. "Silas Weatherford won't take kindly to this. The railroad has plans. The railroad can make new plans. You don't know who you're crossing, woman." Ezekiel moved then, casual-like, but suddenly he stood between the men and the porch, axe still in hand. The lady's given her answer. Harold sneered. "And who might you be, her hired hand?" "Just a man who knows when visiting time's over," Ezekiel replied mildly. The three men retreated to their horses, but Harold turned back. "This isn't over, Miss Blackwood. Prospect Hollow has ways of dealing with those who don't fit." "So do I, Mr. Finch, so do I." After they left, Temperance found her hands shaking not from fear, but from anger. "Thank you," she said to Ezekiel. He shrugged. "Wasn't nothing. Though I'm curious why you turned down 3 proposals in as many minutes. Most women would call that a good morning's work." "Despite everything," Temperance laughed. "Lord help me if those are my best options." But her laughter died as she looked toward Angel Well, visible from her eastern window. Something was wrong. The stream that usually ran strong even in winter seemed diminished. "We need to check the water," she said. They took her mule, Stubborn Jack, with Ezekiel walking alongside through the knee-deep snow. The path to Angel Well wound up through aspens and pine, beautiful in its winter coat but treacherous with ice. The spring itself sat in a natural bowl of rock, fed by underground channels that had run clear for longer than anyone remembered. But today, the usually robust flow had slowed to a trickle. "That's not natural," Temperance said, dismounting. "This spring's never run low, not in 20 years. Ezekiel knelt beside the water, studying the ground. His time with the railroad showed. He read the land like others read books. Someone's been digging upstream. See these marks, blasting powder. Recent, too. They followed the stream bed up, finding what Temperance had feared, a crude dam built across the narrow canyon above Angel Well. Fresh tool marks and boot prints told the story clear as newspaper print. "They're choking off the water," she said. "If the spring dies before I can establish the school and dispensary, the land reverts to Meridian." Ezekiel finished. "Clever. Looks legal from a distance, just men working their own claim." "Except this isn't their claim." Temperance pointed to a survey marker driven into a pine tree. "That's a Meridian mark. I've seen enough of them." Ezekiel pried the marker free with his knife. The metal stake bore Meridian's stamp. Sure enough. But also something else, fresh file marks where someone had altered the survey numbers. "They're moving boundaries," he said quietly, "making it look like this section belongs to them." "Can you prove it?" "With the right maps, maybe, but Sheriff Dugan is deeper in Silas's pocket than lint." Temperance finished. "We'll need more than one marker." They spent the rest of the day documenting what they found. 7 altered markers, each moving Meridian's claimed boundary further onto what the original surveys showed as public land. Ezekiel sketched each location while Temperance collected the markers themselves. As the sun dropped low, painting the snow pink and gold, they started back, but at a bend in the trail, Ezekiel suddenly pushed Temperance behind a boulder. "What?" "Shh," he pointed to fresh tracks crossing their path. "We're not alone." 3 men emerged from the trees, rifles casual in their hands. Temperance recognized 2 as Meridian security, but the third was Sheriff Dugan himself. Well, Dugan said, tobacco juice staining the snow at his feet. "Miss Blackwood and friend, trespassing on Meridian property." "This isn't Meridian property, Sheriff, and you know it," Temperance said, standing despite Ezekiel's warning hand. "Got papers that say different." Dugan patted his chest pocket. "File just this morning. This whole section, including that spring, sits on Meridian land. You're stealing water, Miss Blackwood." "Those papers are based on false markers." "Careful now," Dugan warned. "Accusing a lawful company of fraud, that's serious talk, the kind that gets people in trouble." One of the Meridian men stepped forward. "We'll be taking those markers you collected. Evidence of theft. See." Ezekiel shifted slightly, and Temperance saw his hand move toward the knife at his belt. But 3 rifles against a knife wasn't odds she liked. "Take them," she said, handing over the canvas sack. "But this isn't over." Dugan grinned, showing yellowed teeth. "Oh, I think it is. You got 6 months to meet old Josiah's terms. Hard to run a school without water. Harder still to run a dispensary. Why don't you make it easy on everyone and sell now, mister? Weatherford's prepared to make a generous offer. How generous? $500 for the lot? Cash money? The land was worth 20 times that, and they all knew it. I'll consider it. Temperance lied. You do that. And Miss Blackwood, next time you're found on Meridian property, we won't be so conversational. After they left, Ezekiel spat in the snow. Snakes, the lot of them. Snakes serve a purpose, Temperance corrected. These men are more like leeches. They made it back to her cabin as darkness fell. Over a dinner of beans and cornbread, they planned. We need those original survey maps, Ezekiel said. The territorial office in Denver would have copies. That's a week's ride in good weather. We don't have time. What about the surveyor himself? Oliver Hutchins did most of the original work around here. Temperance brightened. Oliver's still alive, living with his daughter in Silver Creek. That's only a day's ride. If Meridian's watching the roads, then we don't take the roads. She stood, pacing again. There's an old Ute trail over Missionary Ridge. Rough going, but passable. You're not going alone. She looked at him, this large, quiet man who'd appeared in her life like a gift and a complication wrapped in one package. Mr. Stoltzfus, you've done enough. This isn't your fight. Isn't it? He leaned back, chair creaking under his weight. I spent 5 years helping the railroad take what wasn't theirs. Looked the other way when families got pushed off their land. Told myself it was progress. He met her eyes. Maybe it's time I help someone push back. Outside, a wolf howled, long and lonely. The sound raised goosebumps on Temperance's arms. All right, she said. We leave at first light. And Mr. Stoltzfus. Better you should know now I don't ride side saddle. He smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. Miss Blackwood, I'd be disappointed if you did. That night, Temperance lay awake planning the school, the dispensary, the water. It all seemed impossible. But impossible, as Ezekiel had said, was just another word for necessary. And somewhere in the darkness, she knew Silas Weatherford was planning too. The game was set, the pieces moving. But Temperance had something Silas didn't count on. The mountain itself was on her side. And it had sent her an unlikely ally who understood both the railroad's tricks and the price of redemption. The wolf howled again, closer now, and Temperance smiled in the darkness. Let them come. The mountain woman was ready to fight. Part 3. The schoolhouse in the horse barn. The old Whitmore barn stood like a cathedral of weathered wood against the morning sky. Temperance walked its length, boot falls echoing in the empty space, while dust motes danced in the light streaming through gaps in the boards. It'll do, she said, more to herself than to Ezekiel, who was testing the strength of the support beams. It'll have to do. Word had spread through Prospect Hollow like wildfire in dry grass. The black herb woman was opening a school, free lessons for any child who'd come. The reactions had been mixed. Are you sure about this? Ezekiel asked, hefting a hammer. That was the 3rd rock through your window this week. Glass can be replaced, Temperance replied, sweeping debris from what would become the teaching area. Ignorance can't. A small voice piped up from the doorway. Miss Temperance. She turned to find a boy, maybe 10 years old, rail-thin and wide-eyed. His clothes were patched but clean, his feet wrapped in rags against the cold. I'm Jonah, he said. Jonah Mills. My ma said. She said you could use help. Temperance studied him. The Mills family worked the poorest claim in the valley. His father had died in a cave-in last spring. Can you read, Jonah? Ma taught me before, he trailed off. Can you work hard? Harder than anybody. Then you're hired. 50 cents a week and all the learning you can swallow. The boy's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Yes, ma'am. What should I do first?" She handed him a broom. "Make this floor clean enough to eat off. We open next Monday." As Jonah attacked the floor with enthusiasm, more figures appeared in the doorway. The Patterson family. Samuel still wheezing from his miner's cough. His wife Margaret holding their daughter Lucy's hand. "Heard you was looking for students," Samuel said, hat in his hands. "I am." "What's it cost?" "Not a penny, that's the point." Margaret stepped forward. "Why? Why would you do this for nothing?" Temperance set down her own broom. "Because I remember what it's like to hunger for learning and have empty hands. Because this valley's children deserve better than growing up thinking the mine or marriage is their only choice." "The pastor says schooling makes children uppity," Margaret said quietly. "Says it gives them ideas above their station." "Good," Temperance replied. "I hope it gives them ideas that reach the stars." By noon, 17 children had been enrolled, their names carefully written in Temperance's ledger. Not many, but enough to start. She'd need supplies slates, chalk, primers. But Oliver Hutchins had surprised her, the old surveyor, grateful for her father's kindness years ago, had not only provided the original survey maps proving Meridian's fraud, but also his late wife's collection of school books. "She was a teacher back east," he'd said, pressing the crate into her hands. "Always dreamed of opening a school out here. Seems fitting they finally get used." That evening, as Temperance and Ezekiel worked to patch the worst gaps in the barn walls, she set up her dispensary in the tack room, shelves for medicines, an examination table cobbled from old planks, clean cloth for bandages. "You're doing too much," Ezekiel warned, watching her label bottles by lamplight. School by day, doctoring by night. The door burst open. "Miss Temperance, come quick." Jonah stood panting in the doorway. "There's been an explosion at the Holloway mine. They're bringing the hurt men here." Already, Temperance could hear the rumble of wagons. She grabbed her medical bag, mind shifting from teacher to healer without missing a beat. "Clear the main floor," she ordered. "Ezekiel, get every lantern lit. Jonah, run to my cabin and bring the chest marked emergency supplies. Go." The first wagon arrived as she finished laying out clean sheets on makeshift beds. 8 men, maybe more, all bearing the telltale burns and wounds of a gas explosion. "Why here?" she asked Tommy Holloway as they lifted his brother from the wagon. "Why not Doc McKinnon?" Tommy's face twisted. "Doc's in Denver for the week." His substitute took one look and said there was nothing to be done, locked his office and went back to his bottle. Temperance's hands were already moving, assessing wounds, prioritizing the worst cases. "Then we do it ourselves. Margaret Patterson, you've helped me birth babies tonight. You're a nurse. Samuel, get that fire roaring. We'll need hot water, lots of it." Through the night they worked. Temperance moved between patients like a general commanding a battlefield, her voice steady and sure. She showed Margaret how to clean wounds, taught Samuel to watch for signs of shock, had young Lucy tearing cloth for bandages with serious determination. Ezekiel proved invaluable, his steady hands and stronger stomach making him perfect for the worst cases. When one miner's wound needed stitching, he held the lantern steady while Temperance worked, neither of them speaking of how the man's screams echoed in the barn. By dawn, all 8 men lived, battered, burned, but breathing. "It's a miracle," Margaret whispered, exhausted but glowing with something like pride. "It's medicine," Temperance corrected gently, "and you helped work it." Sheriff Dugan arrived as the last patient was settled, Silas Weatherford at his side. The railroad man's suit was immaculate despite the early hour, his smile sharp as glass. "Quite the operation you have here, Miss Blackwood," Silas observed, stepping fastidiously around a blood-stained cloth. "Though I wonder if you have the proper licenses for such medical practice." "I'm helping injured men, Mr. Weatherford. I didn't realize compassion required paperwork." "Everything requires paperwork." He produced a document from his coat. Cease and desist order. This building isn't approved for medical use or educational purposes. You're creating a public hazard. Temperance took the paper, scanning it quickly. This is dated 3 days ago, before I even announced the school. Silas's smile widened. I like to be prepared. You have 48 hours to clear out, or Sheriff Dugan here will have to enforce the order. You can't do this. Samuel Patterson stepped forward, fists clenched. She saved these men's lives. And I applaud her efforts, Silas said smoothly. Perhaps she should consider selling her land to someone better equipped to manage such civic improvements. The railroad, for instance, has plans for a proper hospital, once we secure the water rights, of course. The room erupted, miners and their families shouting, Dugan's hand moving to his pistol, Silas standing calm in the center of the storm he'd created. Enough, Temperance's voice cut through the chaos. Mr. Weatherford, you've delivered your message. Now get out of my schoolhouse. Your barn, he corrected, and not for much longer. After they left, the crowd dispersed slowly. Families collected their wounded, but not before many pressed coins or goods into Temperance's hands, a dozen eggs, a small sack of flour, a carefully hoarded silver dollar. We need this place, Margaret Patterson said fiercely. We need you. That afternoon, as Temperance cleaned instruments and rolled bandages, Cordelia Hatcher swept in like a storm crow. The pastor's wife clutched her Bible like a weapon, her pinched face radiating disapproval. I've held my tongue long enough, she announced. This den of impropriety must close. 8 men are alive because this den was open, Temperance replied, not looking up from her work. You had men and women working side by side at night, unmarried persons in close proximity, blood and anatomy exposed. We were saving lives. You were promoting immorality. Cordelia's voice rose to a screech. I won't have my congregation corrupted by your modern ideas and race mixing. There it was, the real objection, naked as a newborn. Ezekiel, who'd been silently repairing a window frame, set down his hammer. Ma'am, I was raised strict Amish. I know scripture well as any, and I recall something about love thy neighbor as thyself. Didn't see no exceptions listed for color or convenience. Cordelia's face went purple. How dare you quote scripture at me? You failed Amish. Rather be failed at faith than successful at hate, he replied mildly. She stormed out, but not before delivering a parting shot. This isn't over. The righteous will prevail. That night, as Temperance and Ezekiel shared a simple meal in the barn they'd taken to eating there to guard the supplies, she found herself studying his profile in the lamplight. Why did you really leave the Amish? She asked. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, my younger brother died. Fever took him. The elders said it was God's will, that seeking English doctors showed lack of faith. He stared at his hands. I couldn't reconcile a God who'd prefer dead children to modern medicine. So you went the other direction working for the railroad? Seemed like the future, progress, moving forward instead of living in the past. His smile was bitter. Took me 5 years to realize I just traded one kind of blindness for another. They sat in comfortable silence, the barn creaking around them as it settled for the night. We could leave, he said suddenly. Take the money Weatherford offered. Go somewhere else. California. Maybe start fresh where nobody knows either of us. Temperance looked around the barn at the medicine shelves, the carefully arranged school supplies, Jonah's small pallet in the corner where the boy had taken to sleeping to guard the school. Could we? She asked softly. Could you walk away knowing what Meridian will do to this place? Could I face myself knowing I had the power to help and chose comfort instead? He sighed. No, I suppose not. Then we stay. We fight. We probably lose. But at least we'll lose standing up. A sound outside made them both freeze. Footsteps trying to be stealthy. Ezekiel reached for the rifle, but Temperance caught his arm. She recognized that particular pattern of movement. "It's all right," she called. "Come in, Jonah." The boy slipped inside, face grave. "Miss Temperance, I was down by the creek. Saw men working by torchlight. They're building something at Coyote Gulch. Something big." Temperance and Ezekiel exchanged glances. Coyote Gulch controlled the watershed that fed Angel Well. Damn," Ezekiel said grimly. "They're going to cut off your water completely." "Then we'd better work fast," Temperance said, standing. "Jonah, first light tomorrow. You run to every family that owes me a favor. Tell them Temperance Blackwood is calling in their debts. We're going to have ourselves a proper school opening. And we're going to need every friend we've got." The boy grinned. "Yes, ma'am," as he scampered off to his pallet. Ezekiel shook his head. "You know Weatherford won't let this stand. The cease and desist, he's just getting started." "Good," Temperance said, steel in her voice. "Because so am I." Outside, a train whistle echoed through the valley, the sound of progress, or the cry of something wild being caged. In the barn that smelled of hay and hope and healing, 3 unlikely allies settled in for the night, knowing that tomorrow the real fight would begin. The ledger exposed and the bloody market day. The morning mist clung to Prospect Hollow like a guilty secret. Ezekiel crouched behind a stack of crates at the Meridian Railroad Depot, watching the early shift change beside him. Jonah fidgeted with nervous energy. "You sure about this, Mr. Zeke?" "Sure as a man can be about stealing from thieves." Ezekiel murmured. He'd spent 3 days observing the depot's routines, noting when the office stood empty. "Remember, you're just a boy looking for work, if anyone asks." "I'm hoping to earn pennies loading freight." Jonah recited, "I know." The night supervisor emerged, yawning and stretching. He nodded to his replacement and ambled toward Main Street and his boarding house bed. Ezekiel counted to 50, then nudged Jonah. The boy scampered across the yard, all innocent angles and wide eyes. Through the window, Ezekiel watched him charm the day clerk, gesturing enthusiastically about his willingness to work. The clerk laughed, ruffled Jonah's hair, and pointed toward the loading dock. As soon as the clerk turned away, Jonah's hand darted out, snagging the ring of keys from the desk. He was back outside in seconds, the picture of dejected youth. "Smooth as butter," Ezekiel said approvingly as they slipped into the records office through the back door. "Your ma would tan your hide if she knew." "Ma's dead," Jonah said matter-of-factly. "Been taking care of myself since last winter." Ezekiel's hand paused on a filing cabinet. He'd assumed, but no matter. The boy had found his place with Temperance now. They worked quickly. Ezekiel knew Meridian's filing system from his old days, knew which drawers held the real business. Soon they had a leather-bound ledger filled with coded entries. "What's it say?" Jonah whispered. Ezekiel's face darkened as he read. "Payment records, bribes, mostly. Look here, D. Sheriff, monthly retainer, $50. That's Dugan. And this CH Community Relations, $20 weekly. Hey. CH. We'll find out." He pulled out papers, sketching quick copies of the most damning entries. "Lord have mercy. They've bought half the town." A door slammed somewhere in the building. Ezekiel shoved the ledger back, grabbed Jonah's shoulder. "Time to go." They slipped out as voices approached, melting into the morning crowd at the market. Ezekiel's heart hammered, but they'd done it. They had proof. The market square buzzed with unusual energy. Word had spread that today Silas Weatherford would hold a public auction for water rights, claiming Temperance had violated her agreement by operating illegally. "It's not even been 2 months," Margaret Patterson protested to anyone who'd listen. "Legal technicalities," Harold Finch replied smoothly. He stood near the auctioneer's platform, ledger in hand. "Miss Blackwood operated medical and educational facilities without proper permits. That voids the will's conditions. Temperance arrived like a queen walking to war. She dressed carefully, her best dark dress, hair pinned severely, medical bag in one hand and a rolled document in the other. Ezekiel fell into step beside her, slipping her the copied ledger pages. "You're sure about this?" he asked quietly. "As sure as Moses facing Pharaoh," she replied. The crowd parted as she approached the platform where Silas Weatherford stood, all oiled charm and sharp smiles. "Miss Blackwood," he called out, "come to bid farewell to your little experiment." "Come to show this town what you really are," she replied, voice carrying clearly. She unrolled her document, a hand-drawn map of the watershed, marked with elevations and flow patterns. Oliver Hutchins had helped her prepare it, his surveyor's expertise making it undeniably accurate. Folks of Prospect Hollow. Temperance addressed the crowd. "You're being sold a bill of goods. This map shows how Meridian's been choking off our water. See here Coyote Gulch, where they've built an illegal dam, and here, where they've diverted Snowmelt Creek into their own holdings." "Preposterous accusations," Silas scoffed. "Where's your proof?" "Right here." She held up the ledger copies. "Payments to Sheriff Dugan, to Harold Finch, to—" She paused, meeting Cordelia Hatcher's eyes in the crowd. "Others who've been spreading lies about my work." The crowd stirred uneasily. Cordelia's face had gone white as flour. "Forged documents," Silas declared. "This woman's desperate to keep her illegal claim." A rumbling cut him off. Not thunder, something worse. Up the valley, a wall of muddy water burst into view, racing down the usually dry channel that ran along Market Street. "The dam!" someone screamed. "The dam's burst!" Chaos erupted. The flash flood, born from Meridian's shoddy construction at Coyote Gulch, surged through the market, tables overturned, goods scattered, people scrambled for higher ground. A child's scream cut through the panic. Little Timothy Morrison, barely 5, clung to an overturned wagon as the water rose around him. Without thought, Temperance plunged into the torrent. The water, thick with mud and debris, pulled at her skirts. She fought toward Timothy, aware of Ezekiel splashing in behind her. "The platform!" Ezekiel shouted. "Get him to the platform!" Together they struggled through the current, Temperance reaching Timothy just as his grip failed. She caught him, held him high, pushed toward where others were pulling people to safety. Sheriff Dugan stood on the platform, shouting orders that no one heeded. "Arrest her!" he bellowed, pointing at Temperance. "She caused this sabotage." "You fool!" Samuel Patterson roared back. "She's saving lives while you're flapping your gums." The flood receded as quickly as it came, leaving Market Street a muddy disaster. Temperance, soaked and filthy, still holding Timothy, face down Dugan. "Arrest me, then," she said quietly. "But first, explain to these people why Meridian built a dam with no spillway. Explain why they used cheap materials and rushed construction." Ezekiel stepped forward, water still dripping from his clothes. "Or better yet, explain this." He held up the original ledger somehow. In the chaos, he'd liberated it from Harold Finch's dropped case. "Your name's all through this book. Sheriff, monthly payments for keeping the peace. That your signature?" Dugan's hand went to his gun, but a dozen miners stepped forward, their own weapons visible. "I wouldn't," Tommy Holloway said conversationally. "Not unless you fancy explaining to the territorial judge why you drew on unarmed folks." "This isn't over," Dugan snarled, but he backed down. Silas Weatherford, somehow still immaculate despite the chaos, smiled coldly. "Indeed it's not. This changes nothing regarding the water rights." "Actually, it changes everything." The voice came from the crowd. A man stepped forward, middle-aged, travel-worn, wearing a badge that caught the light. "U.S. Marshal Josiah Kincaid," he announced. "Been investigating reports of fraud and intimidation in this region. This flood just made my job easier." He looked at the ledger in Ezekiel's hands. "That evidence?" "Yes, sir," Ezekiel replied, handing it over. "And, Mr. Weatherford, Sheriff Dugan, I'll need you both to come with me. Questions to answer about interstate commerce violations." "This is ridiculous," Silas protested. "I have lawyers." "Good. You'll need them." Marshal Kincaid's voice was flat as hammered iron. "Ma'am," he said to Temperance, "I'll need your testimony, but first, might want to see to your people." As the marshal led the protesting men away, Temperance looked around at the mud-covered crowd. Her people. When had they become that? "The dispensary's open," she called out. "Anyone hurt? Come there. Jonah, run to my cabin and bring all the clean cloth you can find. Margaret, I'll need your help again." "What about the market?" someone asked. "Everything's ruined." Temperance squared her shoulders. "Then we rebuild, we clean up, we help each other. That's what communities do." Cordelia Hatcher pushed through the crowd, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I took their money. For the church. I told myself, but I'm sorry." Temperance studied her for a long moment. "Can you bandage wounds?" What?" "Can you bandage wounds? We have injured people and not enough hands." Yes, I can." "Then stop crying and start helping. Redemption's not found in tears, it's found in action." As the sun climbed higher, Prospect Hollow transformed. The same people who'd whispered about Temperance now worked beside her. The flood had washed away more than mud. It had exposed the rot beneath Meridian's promises and revealed something stronger: community. "You did it," Ezekiel said quietly as they worked side by side, treating cuts and bruises. Did what?" "Changed things. Look at them working together. Color and class be damned." Temperance followed his gaze. He was right. Miners and merchants, wives and widows, even prim Cordelia Hatcher, all muddy and exhausted and somehow unified. "It's not over," she warned. "Meridian has deeper pockets than one marshal can empty." "Maybe, but now they know we'll fight, and we know we're not alone." Young Timothy Morrison, cleaned up and bandaged, tugged at Temperance's skirt. "Miss Temperance Ma says to tell you thank you, and can I still come to school on Monday?" Despite everything, the exhaustion, the danger still lurking, the mud in places mud should never be, Temperance smiled. "School's not going anywhere. Timothy, we'll be here Monday and every day after." As twilight fell over the valley, the barn-turned school stood solid against the darkening sky. Inside, by lamplight, Temperance updated her medical records while Ezekiel repaired flood damage. The ledger was gone to evidence, but its revelations remained. Half the town's leadership had been bought, but the other half, the working half, the struggling half, had found its voice. "What now?" Ezekiel asked. Temperance looked up from her work. "Now we prepare for whatever Weatherford throws at us next. He won't give up easily. Neither will we." Outside, the sound of hammering echoed through the valley as Prospect Hollow rebuilt. The water still flowed. For now. The school still stood. For now. And in the morning, children would still come to learn, drawn by the promise of something better than the lives their parents had known. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was hope. And in the harsh mathematics of the frontier, hope counted for more than gold. Part the trial under the sky. The morning sun cast long shadows across the meadow outside Prospect Hollow. What couldn't fit in the cramped courthouse, which was most of the town, had spilled into God's own courtroom. Planks laid across barrels made benches, and a raised platform constructed from mining timbers served as the judge's bench. Unprecedented. Judge Francis Moorcraft muttered, adjusting his traveling robes. The circuit judge from Denver had arrived to find the official courthouse mysteriously locked. Sheriff Dugan, having hidden the keys before Marshal Kincaid hauled him to the territorial jail. "The people deserve to see justice done," Temperance said firmly. She stood before the makeshift bench, document case in hand. Sunlight's the best disinfectant for corruption. Silas Weatherford sat at the defendant's table, his city lawyers flanking him like well-dressed vultures. Despite everything, his smile remained sharp enough to cut glass. He'd made bail within hours of arrest. Meridian's pockets ran deep. "This is hardly a proper legal venue," one lawyer protested. Neither was bribing half the town leadership. Judge Moorcraft replied dryly, "We'll make do. Marshal Kincaid, present your evidence." What followed was a careful dissection of Meridian's schemes. The ledger spoke its damning truth payments to officials, plans to strangle the water supply, forged survey markers. Ezekiel testified about his past work for the railroad, his inside knowledge lending weight to each accusation. "You're taking the word of a failed Amish and a colored spinster," Weatherford's lawyer sneered. "I'm taking the word of evidence," Judge Moorcraft corrected. "Unless you're suggesting this ledger wrote itself." The crowd stirred as witness after witness came forward. Oliver Hutchins presented the original surveys, proving the boundary fraud. Tommy Holloway described the unsafe mining practices Meridian endorsed. Even Harold Finch, given immunity for his testimony, admitted to receiving payments. But it was Cordelia Hatcher who provided the day's most dramatic moment. "I took their money," she said, voice clear despite her tears. $20 a week to spread discord, to preach against Miss Blackwood's school. They said God favored progress, that the railroad was his instrument." "And now?" Judge Moorcraft asked gently. Cordelia looked at Temperance. "Now I know the devil can quote scripture for his purpose. I saw who worked to save lives when the flood came, and who stood counting their coins." The afternoon brought unexpected drama. Weatherford's lawyers had produced their own witnesses, hired men who swore Temperance had sabotaged the dam, that she practiced heathen medicine, that her school taught dangerous ideas. "What dangerous ideas?" Judge Moorcraft inquired. "That anyone can learn to read," one man said earnestly. "That women should know numbers beyond household accounts. That colored folk and white folk can sit in the same classroom." A ripple went through the crowd. These were indeed radical notions to some. Temperance stood. "Your Honor, I'd like to present my own witnesses." One by one, her students came forward. Little Lucy Patterson, reading from a primer with careful precision. Jonah Mills, solving arithmetic problems on a slate. The Morrison boy, reciting the preamble to the Constitution in a clear, proud voice. These children learned in 2 months what some never learn. Temperance said, "Is knowledge dangerous only to those who profit from ignorance?" But the real turning point came when Margaret Patterson took the stand. "My husband's alive because of Miss Blackwood," she said simply. When the mine gas exploded, Doc McKinnon was gone and his substitute was drunk. She worked through the night, teaching us all how to help. 8 men breathing today who wouldn't be without her. Practicing medicine without a license. Weatherford's lawyer pounced. "Saving lives without permission." Margaret shot back. "Which law matters more, the one written in books or the one written in our hearts?" Judge Moorcraft held up a hand for silence. "Mr. Weatherford, do you have anything to say in your defense?" Silas stood, smoothing his vest. "Your Honor, I'm a businessman. I see opportunity where others see obstacles. Yes, I made arrangements with local officials, that's how business is done. As for the water situation, we were simply maximizing resource efficiency." A child's cry cut through his words. Young Timothy Morrison had been trying to reach his mother when 2 of Weatherford's hired men blocked his path. One man pushed the boy roughly aside. The meadow erupted. Miners surged forward. Mothers shrieked. And suddenly guns appeared on both sides. "Nobody move!" Marshal Kincaid shouted, but his voice was lost in the chaos. Then, clear as a mountain stream, the church bell began to ring. Not the regular Sunday calling, but the rapid, urgent pattern reserved for fires and disasters. Temperance stood at the platform's edge, pulling the rope they'd rigged to the old bell brought from town. "Stop," she called between peals. "Look at yourselves. Look at that child." The crowd hesitated. Timothy lay in the dust, crying more from fear than hurt. The armed men faced each other across a gap that seemed to grow wider with each second. "Is this what we've become?" Temperance continued, still ringing the bell. "So twisted by greed and fear that we'd spill blood at a child's cry. That boy could be any of ours. Will we let him grow up in a world where might makes right, where money matters more than mercy?" Slowly, weapons lowered. Someone helped Timothy to his feet. The moment of violence passed like a summer storm, leaving everyone a bit shaken and somehow cleaner. It was Cordelia Hatcher who moved first. The pastor's wife walked deliberately to where Timothy stood and knelt beside him, checking for injuries. Then, finding only scrapes, she looked at the hired gun who'd pushed him. "Shame," she said quietly, but her voice carried shame on any man who'd lay hands on a child. The gunman stepped back, suddenly unable to meet anyone's eyes. Judge Moorcraft banged his gavel on the makeshift bench. "I've seen enough, Mr. Weatherford." The evidence clearly shows a pattern of fraud, bribery, and intimidation. While these are matters for territorial and federal courts to fully prosecute, I can rule on the immediate matter. He turned to address the crowd. "The water rights and land specified in Josiah Whitmore's will legally belong to Miss Temperance Blackwood. Any interference with her establishment of a school and dispensary constitutes criminal action. Furthermore, Meridian Railroad must pay damages for the illegal dam and its consequences." "This is an outrage," Weatherford snarled. "You haven't heard the last—" "Actually, Mr. Weatherford, I believe we have." Marshal Kincaid stepped forward, producing a new set of papers. "Telegraph came this morning. Federal investigation into Meridian's practices across 3 territories. You're to surrender your passport and remain in custody pending trial." As Weatherford was led away, still protesting, the crowd began to disperse. But Temperance noticed a stranger at the meadow's edge, a man in a decent suit who'd watched the entire proceedings with keen interest. He approached as she climbed down from the platform. "Miss Blackwood, my name is William Thornberry. I represent a group of investors interested in ethical development of the Western Territories." "Not interested in selling," Temperance said flatly. "Not here to buy," Thornberry assured her. "Here to learn. What you've built here, education and medical care tied to community development, it's a model worth replicating. We'd like to fund expansion of your work." Temperance studied him carefully. "And in return, you teach others how to do what you've done. Create a network of such institutions across the frontier." Before Temperance could respond, Ezekiel appeared at her elbow. "Everything all right?" Mr. Stoltzfus," she said. "Meet Mr. Thornberry. He wants to spread our dangerous ideas." Thornberry smiled. "Ideas are only dangerous to those who fear change. What you've proven here is that community investment yields better returns than extraction. We'd like to invest in that future." "We'll think about it," Temperance said carefully. "Right now, we have a school to run and patients to tend." As Thornberry departed, leaving his card, Ezekiel shook his head. From outlaw to model citizen in one afternoon. Quite a journey. "Journey's not over," Temperance reminded him. "We won today, but there'll be other Weatherfords, other schemes. The price of justice is eternal vigilance." "Then we'd better stay vigilant," Ezekiel agreed. "Together." The word hung between them, weighted with meaning. Somewhere in the past weeks, between crises and confrontations, they'd become partners in more than just legal battles. As the sun set over Prospect Hollow, casting the valley in gold and shadow, the town began to reshape itself. The school would stay open, the dispensary would serve all who needed it, and the water would flow free, as old Josiah had intended. "You know what this means?" Jonah asked, appearing at Temperance's side with his eternal enthusiasm. "What's that?" "We're going to need more books, Lots more books, maybe even a library. Temperance laughed, the sound carrying across the meadow like a promise. Then we'd better get building. The bell still hung from its improvised frame, ready to call the community together again when needed. And as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, it seemed to Temperance that justice, like water, would always find its way sometimes through the straightest channel, sometimes by winding paths, but always, eventually, flowing toward the light. Part 6. You'll drown in my desire. The rain came gentle that evening, pattering against the barn roof like whispered secrets. Inside, the makeshift hospital ward had finally emptied. The last patient sent home with careful instructions and a bottle of willow bark tincture. Temperance stood among the scattered evidence of the day's chaos-bloodied bandages, empty medicine bottles, the lingering scent of carbolic acid and fear. "You should rest," Ezekiel said from the doorway. He'd been hauling water from the well, his shirt damp with rain and exertion. "Been 3 days since you've had proper sleep." "Sleep's a luxury I can't afford," Temperance replied, but her hands trembled slightly as she stoppered the last bottle. The weight of recent events, the trial, the confrontation, the endless stream of injured and ill had carved deep lines around her eyes. "Even mountains need rest, or they crumble." He moved into the barn, his presence somehow making the large space feel smaller, warmer. "Sit, I'll finish cleaning." "I don't need—" Temperance. Just her name. But the way he said it stopped her protest. Not a command, but a plea wrapped in understanding. She sank onto a hay bale, suddenly aware of how her bones ached. Around them, the barn held the quiet that comes after storms, when the world takes stock of what remains. "I keep thinking about Josiah," she said quietly. How he saw all this coming. The water wars, the railroad's greed. Why trust me with stopping it? Ezekiel set down his bucket and settled beside her, careful to leave proper space between them. "Maybe because he knew you wouldn't stop at just stopping it, you'd build something better in its place. I'm 40 years old. Ezekiel, never had a husband, never had children, spent my life learning from books and herbs while other women learned from family and hearts. What do I know about building communities? More than you think." His voice was soft in the lamplight. "I've watched you these weeks. You don't just heal bodies, you heal rifts. You don't just teach letters, you teach possibility." She turned to look at him, this large, quiet man who'd walked into her life bearing dangerous gifts. "And what about you? What are you building?" "Trying to rebuild myself, I suppose. Find out if a man can wash railroad dirt from his soul." He stared at his hands. 5 years I helped them take what wasn't theirs, told myself it was progress. But progress that crushes people under its wheels isn't progress at all. "So you're seeking redemption?" "Seeking something, purpose, maybe penance, or just—" He paused, seeming to wrestle with words. "A place where the good I do might outweigh the harm I've done." The rain intensified, drumming against the roof. The lamp flame flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Temperance became acutely aware of his nearness, the heat radiating from his body in the cool evening air. "I've been alone so long," she whispered, surprising herself with the admission. "Built walls higher than these mountains. Told myself it was strength, but maybe it was just fear." "Fear of what?" "Of needing someone, of being needed for more than my skills." She laughed, but it was brittle as autumn leaves. Easier to be the herb woman on the mountain than to be just a woman. Ezekiel shifted slightly closer. "You could never be just anything. Temperance Blackwood." The way he said her full name sent something shivering through her. She'd heard it spoken in anger, in dismissal, in grudging respect, but never quite like this, as if each syllable was something precious. "I'm not an easy woman," she warned, "set in my ways, sharp-tongued, more comfortable with plants than people." "I'm not an easy man," he countered. "Carry ghosts, dream of tracks being laid over bones. Sometimes wake thinking I still work for them. Quite a pair we make. Maybe that's the point. Maybe broken people fit together better than whole ones. She looked at him then, really looked, saw the pain carved into the lines of his face, but also the hope beginning to bloom there. Felt an answering bloom in her own chest, terrifying and wonderful. "Ezekiel," she began, then stopped. How did one speak desires locked away for decades? How did one admit to loneliness so profound it had become part of your bones? He seemed to understand. Slowly, telegraphing his intent, he raised one large hand to her face. His thumb brushed her cheek, calloused but gentle. "All these weeks," he murmured, "watching you fight for this town, for these people, watching you stand against men who'd crush you without thought, and all I could think was how I wanted to stand beside you, not in front, not behind, beside." "I want to feel you deeper," she whispered, the words escaping before thought could cage them. It wasn't just physical desire she spoke of, though that was there too, surprising in its intensity. She meant deeper in her life, her purpose, her carefully guarded heart. Ezekiel's eyes darkened. He leaned closer, his forehead touching hers. "Darlin," he said, voice rough as mountain stone, "you'll drown in my desire." Not a warning, but a promise, not conquest, but mutual surrender. Their lips met, soft at first, tentative as dawn breaking, then deeper, hungrier, years of loneliness seeking solace in shared warmth. His hands tangled in her hair, pins scattering like tiny surrenders. Her fingers gripped his shoulders, anchoring herself in the solid reality of him. When they broke apart, breathing hard, the barn seemed to spin gently around them. "I should go," he said, but made no move to leave. "Should you?" she challenged, finding courage in the desire written plain on his face. "Temperance." Her name again. This time a prayer and a question rolled into one. "I'm not a blushing girl. Ezekiel, I know what I want. The question is, do you—" For answer, he kissed her again, deeper this time, and she tasted promise on his lips. When his hands found the buttons of her collar, she didn't stop him. When her own fingers worked at his shirt, he helped her. What followed was gentle as rain, fierce as prairie fire, in the soft hay, surrounded by the scent of healing herbs and honest work. They found each other, not the frantic coupling of youth, but the deliberate joining of souls who'd waited long enough to know the value of what they shared. He mapped her body like territory he intended to cherish, each touch a vow. She answered with her own exploration, marveling at the contrast of strength and tenderness. When they joined, it was with sighs that spoke of homecoming after long exile. After, they lay entwined in the hay, a rough blanket pulled over their cooling skin. The rain had gentled to a whisper, and somewhere in the distance, a nightbird sang. "What happens now?" Temperance asked, practical even in the aftermath of passion. "Now we face tomorrow together," Ezekiel replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "If you'll have me." As partner in the school, as partner in everything, the school, the dispensary, the fight that's surely coming, all of it. She was quiet so long he wondered if she'd fallen asleep. Then, "I'm not good at needing people." "Neither am I. Maybe we can be bad at it together." She laughed, the sound rich and real. "Is this what redemption feels like?" "Don't know about redemption, but it feels like hope." They talked through the night, voices soft in the darkness, made plans, practical ones about expanding the school, dreamful ones about the future they might build, shared stories of their pasts, the paths that had led them to this unlikely moment. When dawn painted the eastern mountains pink and gold, they rose and dressed, suddenly shy as new lovers despite being far past the usual age for such things. "People will talk," Temperance warned as she repinned her hair. "Let them. We've faced down worse than gossip." Cordelia Hatcher will have apoplexy. Good. Maybe she'll be too busy recovering to cause trouble. Temperance turned serious. This changes things. Ezekiel, if we stand together publicly, as more than partners in the school, then we show this town that love doesn't follow their narrow rules, he finished. That a former Amish man and a black herb woman can build something good together. It won't be easy. Nothing worth doing ever is. She moved into his arms one more time before facing the day. No regrets. Only that it took a blizzard and a corrupt railroad to bring us together. Outside, Prospect Hollow was waking. Smoke rose from chimneys. Roosters crowed their morning challenges. And somewhere, a child laughed. The town they'd fought for, the community they were building, waited for another day of small miracles and ordinary struggles. Ready? Ezekiel asked. Hand on the barn door. Temperance straightened her spine, lifted her chin. Ready? They walked out together into the morning light. No longer alone in their purpose. Whatever came next, and Silas Weatherford's arrest was far from the end of Meridian's threat, they would face it as one. The barn stood behind them, witness to transformation. What had begun as a shelter from storms had become something more, a place of healing, learning, and now love. The very walls seemed to hum with new purpose, as if understanding that the strongest foundations were built not just on land and water rights, but on the choice of two souls to stand together against whatever winds might blow. And in the dispensary window, young Jonah watched them walk hand in hand toward the main cabin, a knowing grin spreading across his face. About time, he thought, and went to set up the schoolroom for the day's lessons, whistling a tune that sounded suspiciously like a wedding march. Part 7. The Drought and the Final Lash. The summer of 1879 came early and stayed late, baking the Colorado mountains until the very stones seemed to thirst. By July, streams that had run since memory began were reduced to muddy trickles. Angel Well still flowed, but weakly, and Temperance knew why. They've built another dam, Ezekiel reported, dust-covered from his reconnaissance. Bigger than before. Professional work this time. They stood at the edge of their property, looking up at the massive earthwork that blocked Coyote Gulch. Even from a distance, they could see the Meridian Railroad logo on the equipment. But Weatherford's in custody, Margaret Patterson said. She'd become Temperance's right hand at the school, her natural teaching gift blooming with opportunity. Weatherford was just one head of the Hydra. Temperance replied, "Cut it off. 2 more grow back." The new threat had a name: Bartholomew Crane, sent from Meridian's Chicago offices to resolve the Prospect Hollow situation. Unlike Weatherford's brash intimidation, Crane worked with surgical precision, every move legal, every document filed properly. "He's smarter," Ezekiel said grimly, "and that makes him more dangerous." The effects were already showing. Without adequate water, the school garden withered. The dispensary's herb plots struggled. Worse, the town's other wells were failing, making Angel Well the last reliable source exactly as Crane intended. "If we can't maintain the school and dispensary," Jonah said, understanding the trap, "the land reverts to Meridian. They win without firing a shot. Then we don't let them win," Temperance declared. "We need to dismantle that dam. It's on Meridian property now," Ezekiel warned. "Legal-like, they bought out the Hendricks claim last month." Legal doesn't mean right. They planned carefully, not destruction that would bring the law down on them. Instead, they'd open the dam's release valves, allowing controlled flow that would restore the water table without catastrophic flooding. "It's dangerous," Samuel Patterson said at the planning meeting. "They'll have guards. Everything we've built is at stake," Temperance countered. "The school, the dispensary, the very life of this valley. Are we going to let them choke us out through legal maneuvering?" One by one, hands rose, minors who'd learned to read at her school, mothers whose children she'd saved. even Cordelia Hatcher transformed from enemy to fierce ally. When? Tommy Holloway asked simply. New moon. 3 nights hence. They moved through darkness like ghosts, 30 souls united in purpose. Temperance led, her knowledge of every trail and gulch invaluable. Ezekiel commanded the technical team miners who understood demolition but would use their skills for preservation, not destruction. The dam loomed against the stars, a monument to greed. As expected, guards patrolled the perimeter, but the miners knew patience, knew how to move silent as ore veins through the earth. There, Ezekiel whispered, pointing to the release mechanism. Open those gates gradual-like. The water finds its natural course. They worked in shifts, some keeping watch while others wrestled with the massive wheel that controlled the spillway. It groaned, rust frozen from disuse. Oil, someone whispered. Brought lamp oil. Slowly, incrementally, the wheel began to turn. Temperance felt the first trickle of released water like a prayer answered. Then more, a steady flow that would, over hours, restore the watershed's balance. Stop right there. Lights blazed. Crane himself stood on the dam's crest, backed by a dozen armed men. But these weren't local toughs. These were Pinkertons, professional and deadly. Sabotage, Crane said conversationally. Destruction of private property, conspiracy. Oh, Miss Blackwood, you've given me exactly what I needed. But Temperance smiled. Have I, Mr. Crane, look closer at what we've done? He frowned, studying the scene. The spillway was open, yes, but controlled. No damage to the dam structure. And the water flow. We've opened a legal spillway, Ezekiel explained, to prevent catastrophic failure. See those cracks in your dam face, the pressure buildup from blocking natural flow. Any engineer would confirm the necessity. You're no engineer. Actually, I am. A new voice from the darkness. William Thornberry stepped into the light, accompanied by Marshal Kincaid and, surprisingly, a photographer. Certified by the Territory of Colorado. I've been documenting the structural failures in this dam for weeks. Crane's composure cracked. This is private property. Subject to territorial safety regulations. Marshal Kincaid interrupted. Mr. Thornberry's report shows imminent danger of catastrophic failure. These good people may have just saved lives. But Crane had one more card. Regardless, the water shortage has prevented Miss Blackwood from meeting her obligations. The school has failed. Has it? Temperance gestured to the crowd. In the lamplight, children stood among the adults, her students, brought by their parents to witness this moment, one by one. They stepped forward. I can read now, Lucy Patterson said clearly. I can write my name and do sums. I learned about the Constitution, Timothy Morrison added, about rights and representation. Miss Temperance taught me to set bones. An older student volunteered, helped Doc McKinnon just yesterday. More voices, a chorus of achievement. The school hadn't just survived the drought, it had flourished despite it. And the dispensary, Crane challenged. Cordelia Hatcher stepped forward. 23 people treated this month alone. Births assisted, wounds tended, fevers broken, all documented. She held up a ledger. I've been keeping records. Seems I have a head for numbers after all. Crane's face contorted in desperation. He grabbed a whip from one of his men not to use, perhaps, but as a threat. The crowd tensed. You think you've won? He snarled. Meridian has resources you can't imagine. We'll bury you in litigation, dry up your funds. The whip cracked, whether by design or accident. It caught Ezekiel across the shoulder as he moved to shield Temperance, leaving a red line through his shirt. That was Crane's mistake. The crowd surged forward, not violent but implacable. Mothers and miners, students and shopkeepers, moving as one. The Pinkertons, professionals though they were, knew when they were outnumbered and More importantly, when they were wrong. "Stand down," their captain ordered quietly. "This isn't what we were hired for." Marshal Kincaid stepped between Crane and the crowd. "Mr. Crane, you're under arrest for assault and reckless endangerment. That dam will be properly modified under territorial supervision, and Meridian Railroad will face federal investigation for interstate water rights violations." As Crane was led away, still protesting, Temperance knelt beside Ezekiel, examining the whip cut. "It's nothing," he said, but she saw him wince. "Everything's something when it's suffered for others," she replied, her touch gentle on his wound. Dawn was breaking as they descended from the dam. The water flowed free, not in destructive flood, but in life-giving streams. Within days, Angel Well would run strong again. "We did it," Jonah breathed, scarcely believing. "We did something," Temperance corrected. "Showed that a community united can't be broken by legal tricks or corporate greed." William Thornberry approached, his photographer still documenting everything. "This will make headlines from here to Washington. The investment group I mentioned, they're very interested in replicating this model communities built on education, healthcare, and mutual support rather than extraction and exploitation." "And Meridian?" Ezekiel asked. "We'll find easier targets elsewhere. The federal investigation, combined with public pressure. They're already negotiating a withdrawal from the territory." As they reached the valley floor, Temperance looked back at the dam, now merely an inconvenience rather than a threat. The whip mark on Ezekiel's shoulder would scar, but like all scars, it would tell a story of standing ground, of protecting what mattered, of love that faced down power and won. "What now?" Margaret Patterson asked. "Now we build," Temperance said simply. "A real schoolhouse, a proper clinic, maybe even that library Jonah keeps pestering about." "And us?" Ezekiel asked quietly, for her ears alone. She took his hand, no longer caring who saw. "We build too, a life, a future, together." The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist. Below them, Prospect Hollow stirred to life, a town transformed, a community forged in struggle and tempered by hope. The water flowed, the school bell would ring, and somewhere in Chicago, railroad executives were learning that some things couldn't be bought, bullied, or stolen. Some things, like water, like knowledge, like love, insisted on flowing free. The drought was ending. The last lash had been struck. And in the healing light of dawn, the future spread before them like an unwritten page, waiting for the careful hand of those brave enough to inscribe it with justice. Part 2. Angel Well and the Vow Beneath the Sun. The autumn of 1879 painted the San Juan Mountains in gold and scarlet. From the newly constructed schoolhouse, proper timber frame with real glass windows, children's voices carried on the crisp air, reciting multiplication tables with the enthusiasm of those discovering they could shape the world with numbers. Temperance stood in the doorway of the adjacent clinic, watching Margaret Patterson lead the class through their lessons. The building smelled of fresh pine and possibility. Funded by the compensation Meridian had been forced to pay and the investments from Thornberry's group. "Admiring your handiwork?" Ezekiel asked, approaching with a ledger under his arm. He'd taken to managing the practical affairs of both institutions, his engineering mind perfect for logistics. "Our handiwork," she corrected, then noticed his expression. "What's wrong?" "Nothing wrong. Letter came from the territorial capital." He handed her the envelope, trying to suppress a smile. "Seems the territory of Colorado wants to officially recognize your medical practice. Full licensing." Temperance read the document twice, scarcely believing. "They're certifying my experience, 20 years of healing without their permission. And now they acknowledge what everyone here already knows. You're a doctor, official as any man with a diploma from back east." She pressed the paper to her chest, overwhelmed. Through the window, she could see the whole of Prospect Hollow's smoke rising from chimneys, the new telegraph lines connecting them to the wider world. the restored flow of Angel Well feeding gardens and homes alike. Temperance, Mr. Ezekiel. Jonah came running, no longer the skinny orphan, but a strong young man of 12, appointed as official assistant teacher. Marshal Kincaid's here, says he's got news from the federal investigation. They gathered in the schoolhouse, most of the town cramming inside to hear. Kincaid stood at the front, a thick folder in his hands. Ladies and gentlemen, the federal investigation into Meridian Railroad is complete. They've been found guilty of systematic fraud across 4 territories. The company's been broken up, assets redistributed to affected communities. A cheer went up, but he raised his hand for silence. Furthermore, compensation payments will be made to all communities affected by their water schemes. Prospect Hollow's share. He paused for effect. $40,000. The silence was deafening, then erupted in pandemonium. $40,000 enough to build a proper hospital, expand the school, even bring in additional teachers and medical staff. There's more. Kincaid continued. The federal government is establishing new water rights protections, based partly on what happened here. They're calling it the Blackwood-Stoltzfus Act. Temperance gripped Ezekiel's hand, their names, linked in law, protecting water rights for communities across the West. One last thing, Kincaid said, his official manner softening. Bartholomew Crane was convicted. He'll serve 5 years. Sheriff Dugan got 3. Silas Weatherford. He smiled grimly. Seems he tried to bribe a federal judge. That bought him 10 years in Leavenworth. Justice. Not perfect, not complete, but more than Temperance had dared hope for when Ezekiel first stumbled through her door in that blizzard. Over the following weeks, Prospect Hollow transformed. The compensation money was allocated democratically, the town voting on priorities, a library, as Jonah had wanted, a proper hospital with surgical facilities, expansion of the school to include older students. But for Temperance, the greatest change was personal. Living openly with Ezekiel had shocked some, delighted others, but mostly had simply become part of the town's new normal, the herb woman and the reformed railroad man, building something together that neither could have managed alone. We should make it official, Ezekiel said one evening as they walked beside Angel Well. The spring ran strong and clear, its water rights now protected by federal law. Make what official? Temperance asked, though her heart already knew. Us, marriage, if you'll have me. She stopped walking, studied his face. I'm 41 years old. Ezekiel, set in my ways. The chance for children likely past. I'm not marrying you for children. I'm marrying you for you. For the way you fight for what's right. For how you see possibility where others see problems. For the way you make me want to be better than I've been. I snore, she warned, and I'll always put healing before housekeeping. I talk in my sleep, sometimes about the railroad days, and I can't cook worth a damn. They stood there, cataloging their faults like treasures, until laughter overtook them. Yes, Temperance said simply. Yes, I'll marry you. The wedding took place on a crystal October morning, right beside Angel Well. The whole town attended, even those who'd once crossed streets to avoid the black herb woman. Cordelia Hatcher, now the school's mathematics teacher, stood as witness. William Thornberry had come from Denver to give Temperance away, since you're the closest thing to family I've found out west. He'd said. Judge Moorcraft, the circuit judge who'd presided over the trial, performed the ceremony. But it wasn't the legal words that mattered most. It was the vows they'd written themselves. I promise, Ezekiel said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd, to stand beside you, not before or behind, to honor your calling as I hope you'll honor mine, to build with you a life based on justice, compassion, and the radical belief that people matter more than profit. I promise, Temperance replied, to trust you with my heart as I've trusted you with my life, to see in you always the man who chose redemption over comfort, community over coin, to make with you a home where all who thirst for water, for knowledge, for hope will find welcome. As they kissed, sealing their union, the church bells rang the same bells that had called for peace during the trial. But now they rang in celebration, their sound carrying across the valley like a benediction. The reception filled the schoolyard. Tables groaned under the weight of communal generosity, venison roasts, corn pudding, wild berry pies. The children performed a play about the water wars, with young Timothy Morrison playing a heroic version of Ezekiel that made the real man blush. "Look at this," Margaret Patterson said, gesturing at the scene. "A year ago, half these people wouldn't speak to each other. Now we're family." "That's what shared struggle does," Temperance replied. "Shows us what really matters." As the sun set, painting Angel Well's waters gold, the newlyweds stood before their greatest achievement, not the buildings or the legal victories, but the sight of their community, whole and thriving. "Any regrets?" Ezekiel asked. Temperance placed a hand on her belly, a secret smile playing at her lips. The herbs had told her what her body had been whispering, improbable, at her age, but not impossible. "None, but I do have a surprise. Remember what I said about being too old for children?" His eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Truly!" "Spring, if I'm counting right. Seems Angel Well isn't the only thing flowing with new life." He lifted her off her feet, spinning her in a circle as the crowd cheered, not knowing the cause but celebrating anyway. Later, as the stars emerged and the celebration wound down, they unveiled the new sign at the property entrance, Prospect Hollow School and Clinic, free to all who seek to learn and heal. Smaller letters below read, "Founded through the vision of Josiah Whitmore and the courage of a community that refused to let greed poison its wells." "Think it'll last?" someone asked. "Nothing lasts forever," Temperance said pragmatically. "But we've built something worth defending. We've proven that ordinary people, standing together, can face down extraordinary greed. We've shown that water and knowledge belong to all, not just those who can pay." The train whistle sounded in the distance. The railroad still ran, but now it brought teachers and medical supplies, students and hope, rather than threats and exploitation. Progress tempered by justice. As the crowd dispersed, Jonah lingered. "Miss Temperance, I mean. Mrs. Stoltzfus, what happens now?" She smiled at the boy who'd become like a son to them. "Now we do the hard work. We teach, we heal, we build, we make sure this valley's children grow up knowing they matter. We prove that what we've done here can be done elsewhere. And if someone else comes, trying to take what we've built, then we'll face them the way we faced Weatherford and Crane. Together." The next morning, a letter arrived from a community in Wyoming. They'd heard about Prospect Hollow's transformation, wanted advice on establishing their own school and clinic. By week's end, 3 more such letters had come. "Seems our dangerous ideas are spreading," Ezekiel observed. "Good," Temperance replied, hand resting on her still flat belly where their improbable child grew. "Let them spread like water finding its way to thirsty ground." Standing in the doorway of the school, watching another day of lessons begin, Temperance marveled at the journey. From a lonely cabin on a mountainside to this, a community transformed, a love unexpected, a future bright with possibility. Angel Well flowed on, its waters no longer threatened but protected, nourishing not just the valley but the dream that resources could serve communities rather than exploit them. In its constant murmur, some heard merely water over stone, but Temperance heard something more, the sound of justice flowing at last, unstoppable as spring itself. The herb woman of the mountain had become something more, teacher, healer, wife, soon-to-be mother. But at heart, she remained what she'd always been, a woman who understood that the truest medicine was hope. And the greatest education was learning that, together, people could change the world. In the schoolyard, children of all colors played together. their laughter rising like prayers toward the Colorado sky. The future they were building might face challenges, but it would never again face them alone. The water was free, the school was open, and in Prospect Hollow, at least, love had conquered fear. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to hear where you're enjoying these tales, whether you're driving through the night, working late, or just relaxing at home. Please share your thoughts in the comments below and let me know what you think of Temperance and Ezekiel's journey. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Night for more tales of love, justice, and redemption in the American frontier. Don't forget to like this video and hit that hype button to help more people discover these stories. Until next time, partners, keep riding toward the sunset, and remember, sometimes the greatest treasures aren't gold or silver, but the communities we build and the love we share along the way.